This exhibition is quite extraordinary because it shows, to some extent, objects that are hardly ever seen in public. Francesca Leoni, and I am the curator of Islamic art here at the Ashmoleon Museum. The exhibition really looks at the role of the supernatural, by which I mean everything that is beyond nature, above nature and beyond man's control. What starts as a journey into something that may seem and may be deemed today as supernatural and superstitious becomes a journey of discovery of the power that the world above mankind has. And clearly that power is first and foremost divine. One of my favorite objects, as a matter of fact, is a beautiful 16th century talismanic shirt, which is a cotton garment completely covered with inscriptions drawn from the Quran, from a very important poem, which is known as Poem of the Mantle, or the Qasida al-Burda, as well as the 99 names of God and other sacred resources to transform the garment into a protective piece of cloth that was allegedly used in battle to protect warriors and make them invincible. In the medallion that you have on the two sides, you actually have some of the so-called 99 names of God. God is known by many names, more than 99 as a matter of fact, but a list of 99 have eventually were codified. And this is one of the most interesting way of looking at Islamic works of art that often have these layers of meaning added by way of what you write on them and what you choose to write on them. We have something similar for some of the sort of so-called magical medicinal bowl, where you have a verse of the Quran written inside the bowl. And when the liquid touches the word of the Quran, the properties of those verses are ingested by the person who seeks healing. But they all rest on strong belief on the curative powers of the Holy Word. After all, there is a verse of the Quran, 1782, that says that, and we send the Quran as healing and mercy to the believers. So the Quran itself speaks about itself as a source of rejuvenation, if you wish, as a source of recovery. And that's why, in a way, you find the Quran transforming simple objects into powerful objects. Here comes the power and the protective element of the title. So it's less about, I mean, all of these, clearly, again, in the more orthodox circles today may be seen as, yes, we know about it, but this does not really portray mainstream Islam or canonical behavior. The reality is, and what is interesting about these things is that also at popular level, these practices reveal how individuals have then experienced and actualized certain beliefs. And so it's, if you wish, is the human contribution to the experience that we are looking at here, and how that reflects back or informs or help defining Islam. And the exhibition really tries to engage particularly with the range of strategies or attitudes that various Muslims at different times and places from different social backgrounds developed in relation to some of these techniques, revealing how they tried to reconcile the ethics of Islam with the possibility of looking into the future, of drawing on God's advice. Because at the end of the day, all of the objects that we have in the exhibition do indicate that God is the ultimate provider of that protection, as well as that ability to look into the future and be guided in order to achieve the best that you can achieve as an individual. Other beautiful objects are, of course, the object that makes the cover of the catalogue, as well as the poster, the lead image of the exhibition, which is known in Arabic as Hamza, but it is very much a universal symbol of protection. In the Berber tradition, in the Buddhist or Jewish traditions, the hand is normally the symbol against the evil eye, the protective device that individuals use to repel harm, to reject harm and evil. And in the Islamic tradition, the hand acquires very specific connotations and denominations, particularly in a Shiite context, in which it is associated both with Fatima, who is the Prophet Muhammad's daughter, as well as members of the Ahl al-Bayt, and more specifically the half-brother of Hussein, who was martyred in Karbala, and the hand of Hussein was actually chopped in a way as a consequence for daring to bring water to Ali himself and the armies who were actually trying to fight the Umayyad usurpers. Islam. And we have a section dedicated at the end of the exhibition that is dedicated to the way in which symbols associated with the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad himself, his clock or burda, his sandal, or even his muhra nubuwa, the seal of prophethood, which is a mark that he had between his shoulder blades, transformed into protective symbols that were actually reproduced into sort of portable forms to give individuals and devotees an opportunity to actually carry these symbols with them across space, in their day-to-day life, in journeys, in order to draw protection, in order to draw assistance. Poem composed by Al-Busiri in the 13th century. This poet was paralyzed. He wrote this ode in praise of the Prophet Muhammad. He dreamt about Muhammad. Muhammad covers him with his burda, with his cloak. And then when he wakes up, he's healed from his paralysis. So the Qasid al-Burda becomes a sort of a miraculous poem that is actually used to cure people. This is the sandal of the Prophet, or stylized renditions of the sandal of the Prophet, whose sacredness essentially derives from the fact not only that it belonged to the Prophet of Islam himself, but by the fact that the sandals of the Prophet touched paradise during the Mi'raj. And so in a way, you're partaking, you're sharing, absorbing part of that blessing. It tells you what to do with it.
Okay, and what should you do with it according to
You
this?
should go around it, circumambulate it. You should kiss it, you should rub it. It says something very interesting about the way you physically activate it with it, including contemplation, the fact that you look at it and you contemplate it. It was designed to be folded into a small package and carried. Of the many, they're all stamps, as you can see, and one example of the type of stamp that was used is also in the case. Most of them are sort of either invocations of very specific Sufi leaders, Sufi sheikhs, very specific sayings associated with either Muhammad, symbols of protection, the hand, of course, returns. But interestingly, on the side of each is a prayer to a she demon.
To
a she demon, to a jinn.
Demon, to a jinn.
Who is held in Turkish and Islamic folklore, held responsible for miscarriage and diseases for children. So I'm still researching this object, but it's interesting because clearly such a specific reference may well indicate that this was effectively designed for the use of a woman who was clearly, trying to be protected in the most important experience in a woman's life, that is motherhood. A part of a tradition of calligraphic compositions that is known as hilya, or a verbal portrait of the Prophet Muhammad. Essentially, Muhammad is described, his appearance is described, and he's portrayed by way of words rather than in image form. We just have a very interesting configuration in which one of the words has been repeated and used to create this sort of flower shape, possibly hinting to the fact that Muhammad, at a later time, like in 18th and 19th century Ottoman art, is sometimes compared and represented as a flower, as a rose. The Ain of Allah, of the word over, making the petal of the flowers at the whose center is in fact the name of Muhammad himself. Traditionally, geomancy means interpreting a set of figures, of dots traced on the sand that you put in a specific sequence. This object was actually devised, and it's unique, there's nothing like it, devised in the middle of the 13th century in Syria, in Damascus, to replace the hand production of the dots with a arranged selection of these dot figures so that you could quite cleanly and quite elegantly line them up by turning the knobs and opening all those windows and eventually allowing for the divine or the person using this instrument to kind of gain insight. So the exhibition does neither condone nor necessarily demonstrate that these are valid methods. It just puts them out there because they are very much part of the larger complex landscape that characterizes devotion within various Islamic societies and contexts. And then the conversations happened and continue to happen at all possible levels, theological, juridical, social level as well. And positions are varied. They go from utter condemnation to ecstatic embracing of these techniques as, veritable methods. This exhibition came together after over a 3-year research effort and is in fact part of a research project funded by the Leverhulme Trust, which explores the role of the supernatural divination and talismanic practices within the Islamic tradition. It looks at it through the lens of visual arts, of works of art, some of which we gathered for the purpose of this display. We borrowed from collections in the UK, both private and public, and the objects date from the 12th century all the way to contemporary practices, as a matter of fact. And they have been gathered from countries as diverse as North Africa all the way to China, and including also areas like Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. The exhibition is divided into 3 sections. The first one looks at 4 divinatory techniques: astrology, which is possibly the best known, geomancy, or science of the sand as it is known in Arabic, dream interpretation, which holds a very important place in Islamic thought and intellectual history, and finally bibliomancy, the use of books to foretell the future. The second gallery looks at a slightly different technique and very important aspects of Islamic culture, which is the use of sacred words, particularly the Quran, the holy book of Islam, for protective or curative purposes. And then we have the last room, which is dedicated to very tiny little small objects that were used in personal devotion for protection and assistance. And that room is in fact entitled Amulets and Talismans, even though these objects are effectively devotional objects that become talismanic, between quotations, simply because of their associations with sacred individuals and their blessings, their sort of miraculous properties.